Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
Time for True Show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff. Pleasure to have you back with us today. And we're going to have a very interesting topic, because in our world seems to be spinning out of control. Seems like every day there's some other catastrophe, crisis, war, and it seems to be never-ending and expanding instead of decreasing. And one can almost feel like a leaf blowing in the wind or a grain of sand in the ocean. You know, what can I do about it? And it's almost a little bit of a hopelessness and apathy, and it can get very upsetting and depressing. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about this with our guest, international attorney and Professor Jonathan Granoff, who is the president of the Global Security Institute. And Buddha, if you put up his pictures up on the screen for us, we'll introduce him with some pictures also. He's representative at the UN to the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates, and a former permanent observer to the UN of the International Anti-Corruption Academy. There you see him with President Bush. And we'll go to the other pictures.
Mikhail Gorbachev.
Mikhail Gorbachev. And you'll see in the other pictures, he's received numerous awards. He's a senior advisor to the Committee on National Security, a fellow and trustee of the World Academy of Art and Science, and the recipient of numerous awards. Arthur Armitage, Distinguished Alumni Award of Rutgers, University of School of Law, and Distinguished Alumni Award of Vassar College. There you see him with President Clinton. He's an award-winning screenwriter of the Constitution, something that really holds our country together, the document that gave birth to a nation. We're very lucky to be able to be here in this nation. He's been on hundreds of radio and television programs, testified in Congress, in the United Kingdom and Canadian parliaments, in the United Nations, and really, we could go on and on and on. There you see a picture of him relaxing in his spare time and his 36 to 48 hour days. And so Buddha, if you bring him up live, and we will introduce Mr. Jonathan Granoff and welcome him to A Time for Truth show, El Tiempo para la Verdad. Welcome.
Isn't it always a time for truth?
I hope so. You know, in this world, it's gotten a little bit distressing, because we look, and as a little boy looking at the beginning of the show, the little logo, looking for the truth sometimes get a little bit depressing.
I think we have to learn to look for the smell of truth within ourselves. That the first place where you have to find the truth is the authenticity of your own conscience.
Our own integrity.
Your own integrity. And from there, if you have that integrity, you can find it outside as well. And it was so nice to see you at the UN the other day for International Day of Conscience.
Oh, Dr. Hong Tazi.
Well, he convened it, but it was actually Bahrain that brought it to an international day in the UN, and it's the nations of the world have done this, have declared a day in which the human capacity of conscience is recognized. And it's kind of a shame that the media hasn't picked up on that. All it does is pick up on the conflicts and something so noble as highlighting conscience is ignored.
It's true. It's too many times you look at things and it's always posthumous, or it's 50 years later, or we have to write it in an encyclopedia or in a book or whatever. You're so right. And so it brings me to something that I want to ask you, because you're heading towards that direction. Here we're at the UN, and as you said, just to acknowledge him, because he's such a great leader, Dr. Hong Taozi of his organization, FOPAL, Foundation of World Love and Peace, such a beautiful goal to go to, and other foundations that were there. But yet I look in the world, and I see all this conflict, and I wanted to ask you, because at times myself, I consider myself a fairly strong individual, but at times I say, what can I do? Where's the world going? So let's start one at a time. And first, where do you think this world is heading to? What is happening here?
Well, the entire world, okay, presently, we are not constraining adequately the powers of science and technology's impact on the natural world. Our decisions of how we impact the natural world are largely being governed by market forces and military forces. Mm-hmm. Is that you?
No, go ahead. It's okay.
So we're destroying species at minimally 1,000 times the evolutionary base rate.
Wow.
Some evolutionary biologists say that it's up to 10,000 times. So, for me, it's really a tragedy when people burn a Bible or a Quran or a Bhagavad Gita or any of the Holy Scriptures. Mm-hmm. But, you can reprint them. But creatures that God has created in this majestic web of life can't be recreated.
No.
Because God's hand created these creatures, and we're destroying them. So the regenerative processes of our rainforests, we're cutting down our rainforests, which is our third lung, faster than it's being rejuvenated. 60 to 80% of our oxygen comes from the phytoplankton, and because of climate change, because how we heat our homes and drive our cars, we're changing the climate, which could change the pH, the alkaline acidic balance of the oceans, and destroy that lung that we share. Like if you lost a lung or I lost a lung, we could live. But if we lose the third lung of the phytoplankton or the rainforest, we both die.
That's right.
So we are living in a system in which our main institutions that are impacting the environment are institutions that we've created. They're not natural institutions, they're institutions of law, states and corporations.
And before you go on, let me just do one thing, because I want to make sure for our viewers you understand what he just pointed out, because it was a little quick and you may not realize this, because many of us think that the trees provide the oxygenation of the atmosphere, turning the CO2 into oxygen. But you have to realize actually that the algae and what he said and the phytoplankton have a tremendous role in this. And so it's very urgent matter that he's about to discuss, but I want to make sure that we got the importance of why we need what's going to be discussed on this show. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So the health of the oceans is necessary for human health,
That's right.
just as the health of the rainforest. And we're putting both of these third lungs, if you will, at risk.
That's right.
And so I was making a parallel that people get very upset when a book that can be reprinted is disrespected. But when a species that can't be reprinted is destroyed, we're ignoring it. We have to change our perception a little bit. So the institutions that we govern ourselves with, modern states, were created in the 17th century. In 1648 is when the modern state was created. And it was created in a place called Westphalia in Europe. It would be in Germany today. And what was the problem that thoughtful people came together to address? What was happening at that time was Protestants, reformists, were saying that the Holy Roman Empire, which controlled the capital markets and which said to everybody, you don't have to read the Bible, we'll read it for you in Latin. You can't have it in your own language. You have to, and you to get to God, can only come through us, only us. And then there were people who were protesting that, said, no, we don't need you. We can have a direct relationship to God. We can read our own Bible in our own languages.
Sure.
And so these people with these different definitions of Jesus' divine love were slaughtering each other in massive numbers by hand in Central Europe. Terrible, terrible time. And some smart people said, we've got to separate these people who were killing in the name of God. And they created states where Protestants could function and Catholics could function. And that's how the origin of the modern state. The problem they were addressing was how to separate people. But the problem today was recognized after 2 horrendous world wars was to stop the scourge of war and to enhance the dignity of people. That's the purpose of the UN. And it was created just after we discovered the atomic bomb. The first resolution of the UN was to get rid of nuclear weapons. But the problems we're facing today are not how to separate people, but how do we come together to work on these common issues that affect all people. And yet the main definition of security that we're operating under is the nation state and militarism, which is not a tool appropriate to address protecting the climate, protecting the oceans, dealing with pandemics, dealing with an integrated financial system that's dynamic and very robust, and does operate with a high degree of coordination and cooperation. Our business community, our militaries are ready to blow up the world, but our business community is still functioning very well.
Isn't that amazing, right?
It's very amazing. So when people say we can't have any global governance, it's just not true. We have global governance for business. We have global governance for business.
Okay.
That's why you can write a letter of credit in Kuala Lumpur and have it honored in Chile or the Bronx.
We can communicate.
We can communicate and move capital and finance very quickly, but we don't have a similar system of justice for protecting the environment, protecting human rights, protecting our future.
It's interesting.
So
it's interesting that what you're bringing out is such a good point. When it comes to something where we're all benefiting, we communicate. And when it comes to fighting this war, that we don't have communication, we have destruction.
Oh no, we've forgotten. There's very little discussion of the why and a lot about the how. So we have financial systems to a large extent disconnected from the production of goods and services. We have medicine dealing with symptoms, not healing. We have philosophy in our universities not concerned with looking at beauty and truth. We have religions that are not concerned with universal love and transcendence, that are obsessed with power and rites, rituals, and practices without the love. And we have, the weirdest of all is we have weapons now. The more we perfect them, the less security we get. And so the world is now spending around over $2 trillion a year producing weapons, many of which we can't use because they would destroy us entirely, when there are very pressing needs to deal with the next pandemic. You know, when the pandemic began, I did some research, and I called Jonas Salk's son, who's a professor at UCLA. Jonas Salk created a vaccine that eliminated polio. And I asked him, tell me about your father's spirit that created universal cooperation in addressing polio, because I knew that behind the scenes, the Soviet leadership and the United States had scientists cooperating to address this. Although publicly they were demonizing each other, we were cooperating scientifically. It was very good, and it worked. And he said, watch the interview of my father with the great journalist Edward R. Murrow. Edward R. Murrow asked Dr. Salk, who owns the patent? And Dr. Salk said, the people own the patent. You can't patent the sunlight. And that spirit of generosity and wisdom still made him very rich, but it also protected hundreds of millions of lives.
That's right.
So I saw Donald Trump was our president at the time.
Yes.
So I wrote an article for Newsweek magazine after doing the research and talking to the people who had been successful in getting rid of smallpox, getting rid of polio. And I said, my goodness, we cannot have a vaccine apartheid world. We have to have a global cooperative effort to address this. But we didn't. We didn't have honesty with President Trump. And a lot of people died. And to this day, we don't have an adequate world cooperative system to address the next pandemic. And I wrote and said, you know, these viruses are smart. They will go and mutate somewhere and they'll come back. So you have to have a universal system to deal with it. Because the world has become very integrated. The world has become very small. And think of it this way. Our time, we're the first generation that has to consciously decide whether we would be the last generation. Right? Because we now have the wherewithal to destroy the future.
Right.
And if we keep destroying the regenerative processes of nature and not cooperating to protect it, we will exacerbate conflicts. And the UN is the only place designed for us to talk to each other and get that job done. And there are policies called the Sustainable Development Goals that the nations of the world have agreed upon to address protecting the climate, to address crushing poverty, to address gender inequity, to address these global threats that challenge all of us. And yet we're still stuck in a mentality as if the climate was a Mexican climate or an Indonesian climate or an Indian climate or an American climate. The climate is one. The truth is we have to start with the premise that the world is one family and that the function of the state, every state, is to protect the citizenry. And no state can protect the citizenry alone, or even a small group of states, to protect the oceans. You need to have everybody together to do it. You can't protect the climate just at a level of one state. Now, in the United States, we're big enough and powerful enough that we could set an example, but unless we're setting an example of conduct that we want others to do, we can't lead. And this is the problem we have right now. We have a large part of the population in the United States that says, America first. And I say, no. God first. And this creation, this planet doesn't belong to America. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. And any one of us will soon have to give all of our property back, including our bodies, and bring our souls back to God. That is what truth is. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care whether you believe it or not. You're not going to be able to keep what you own in this world after your body decomposes. And yet, in our mind, we say, oh, our corporation will last, our country will last. No, it won't last. Nothing lasts in this world. Nothing. Everything changes. But the virtues that make us human, our compassion, our justice, our love, our caring, those are qualities that resonate in the soul of every human being everywhere. And when those qualities govern our behavior, our lives are fulfilled.
Our spirituality, our integrity, our harmony with the whole nature,
our being human, our being human.
You
We're
know,
not a mistake.
It's a pleasure to hear what you're saying, because sometimes in this world with so much technology, people have forgotten the amazing miracle of life. And you and I were teasing before the show about that the trees never go on strike. The grass always grows. But if we destroy it all, there will be no grass, there will be no trees, there will be no animal life.
Yeah.
And it's an insanity.
But it's not only, but we think, the point I was making is the trees are not external to us. They are like our upside down lung. The oceans are not external to us. They are breathing us. And we are obviously created as part of a whole in a most wondrous way.
Exactly.
So we have to say, how do we move our governmental institutions at a local, national, and global level to be in harmony with what is the reality that we're given from God, which is a system that is integrated, that works in a holistic way. So what are the things that bring us together, and what are the things that separate us? And it's so interesting. You could see it in the application of the Golden Rule. So you can see what brings us together is love, compassion, patience, justice, peacefulness. They bring us together with ourselves, with each other.
That's right.
And they bring us together with inside too. And when nations treat each other with dignity and respect, security and stability is obtained. And I'll give an example. World War I, we put crushing reparations on the Germans and we reaped the whirlwind of Nazism. World War II, the United States instituted a Marshall Plan to build up the vanquished, to build up our enemies. Imagine that. Imagine the values that we expressed and all the goodwill that we created. We ended up with Germany and Japan being trading partners and free societies. So when people say, oh, it's too idealistic, no. Spare me the realism that says we can continue to burn the planet and everything will be okay. Spare me the realism that says we can deploy nuclear weapons pointed at each other in perpetuity and not use them by accident, madness, or design. Spare me that realism, and let's use the realism that we know that works. The realism that we had when we worked together to address polio. The realism that when we built up the vanquished, that works. The realism that when you spread goodwill, you obtain friends and security. The realism that says we need to have a little bit of humility and realize that all human beings, no matter what nation, religion, or beliefs they have, are precious in the eyes of the Creator. And what every one of us can do is think, well, how can we get our leaders to adhere to these values? Now, you don't have to know a whole lot of policy, but you could ask questions, especially in democracies. So here are 3 questions that I think will tell you where to go. One is, ask, what are you doing about poverty? We're the first time in human history in which we can eliminate the crushing poverty that 1 billion people on the planet are living in. By that I mean, no matter how hard they work, it doesn't get any better for them. No one has to suffer from that anymore. And it's in every single spiritual tradition to address that. 2, what are you doing to protect the climate? Because we all depend on this climate and it requires us to cooperate. And if we don't do it, we're going to have tremendous chaos in the world, tremendous expansion of poverty and suffering. Our cities that are on the coast are going to be underwater. This is not just you can believe anything you want. You can believe you can have in your mind you can have planet A and planet B, but in reality there is no planet B. So you can ask, what are you doing to protect the climate? And the third is, what are you doing to get rid of nuclear weapons? Which is a legal duty under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which the International Court has unanimously said there's a duty to do. So you ask these questions and then ask yourself, what am I doing to find the deepest, most precious values that I have that come from the depths of my soul? And what am I doing to be in harmony with them and bring them into action? If you're a doctor, are you healing people? If you're a street cleaner, are you making the streets clean? If you're a school teacher, are you loving your students and being an example of those qualities? Whatever you're doing, there's always an opportunity to express the qualities of the soul. And that is a question each of us has to ask. And the answer to that question is private. You don't have to answer to any human being on the score of bringing those values. But on those other questions, what are you doing to protect the environment? What are you doing to get rid of nuclear weapons? What are you doing for the poor and disenfranchised? Those are public questions. And our leaders need to be held to account to live up to the promise of being human. And I say the promise of being human is a promise that each of us made before we came into this world. That's what got us here. We promised the Creator to do our best. Think deeply in your own conscience. Doesn't that make sense to you? That what brought you here was a blessing? Look at any infant. Look at any infant. Look in their eyes and see what they're bringing into the world. You and I came with that same wondrous openness, responsiveness, and may I say love. And there's nothing more fulfilling than bringing that into action. So we need to ask ourselves every day, am I bringing that love into action? And we need to demand of our political leaders answers to what are you doing in this unique moment in human history in which the most practical happens to be the most virtuous. That's unique. We never had that before. And our political leaders need to be held to that standard because that's the problem we face today. In the 17th century, The problem was, how do you separate these religious fanatics, right? Today, it's how do we bring them together?
That's right. We progress tremendously, and you bring out such good points because there's a balance. We've grown so much technologically with so much potential, as you said, and yet are we creating with the science and the engineering and the technological advancements? Are we creating, or as you said, are we using it in a different way, in a selfish way, thinking somehow that we have no impact on the environment, on the planet, and all these things you said? And we have a few moments left in the show, but I wanted to ask you something. For 2024 and beyond, to our viewers, what would you like that you, being such a successful man in life, I know you're a very humble guy, very down-to-earth guy, but if you could share with our viewers, what would you want us as a group, individually, each one as themselves, what should we do moving forward in 2024? So when we look back in 2025, you go, we did that. We saved our planet. We brought people together. I'll let you end with that.
I couldn't tell what everybody should do, but I do believe that everyone has a conscience. And that's where we met it, the Day of Conscience. And it is conscience is what gives the answer to why, because it opens up the space within us for inner guidance and to find the guidance that brings love into action. That's what I'm trying to do with myself. So there's two dimensions to that. One is find those beautiful qualities within oneself, and that's the inner. The outer is develop skills that will be of service to others. Develop skills that will be of service to others. And then, like in a great basketball team, if you keep moving, the ball's going to come to you. There'll be opportunities to serve if you make that your real intention. How can I bring love into action for my fellow human beings? How can I separate from myself the things that separate me from others? But the future of the planet, I have to say, is ultimately beyond our jurisdiction. But the possibility of having fulfilled lives in which our own humanity is expressed, that's in our gift. And I don't think I'm wise enough to tell it what everybody should do. I do think in this election in the United States, it's pretty obvious that there's a candidate who lies, cheats, steals, and doesn't care, and believes everybody works for him. And that's despicable. Who treats, who's a court in New York adjudicated him a rapist. 60 courts said that the election was legitimate. That's a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer. And that's the bigger issue for their state. But each individual is a spirit that came from God, is more important than the state. It's more important. It says every single human being is like a universe. And each one of our lives comes directly from God. We create states, but God created you and me. States don't have souls. Companies don't have souls. The United States doesn't have a soul. It's a bunch of paper and ideas. But you and I, we have a soul, and we have love. And we need to bring that into action. And that I think is coming back to what we were talking about before. Loving people and using things, never loving things and using people.
Absolutely. Pleasure to have you on the show again with us.
I got going, excuse me.
No, it's a beautiful thing. And for all of you watching, let's do that moving forward this year. Let's look at the fact, as it's defined in Webster's dictionary, really in all the dictionaries, we're human beings. It's in the dictionary. Human beings. We're beings. We exude energy. We feel each other. Let's make that energy warm. Let's realize that all of us make mistakes and apply, as Jonathan Granoff said, the golden rule. Let's try to give what we would want for ourselves, so then in the future we plant the seeds and can harvest the fruit that's a positive one. Let's move forward. Let's take what we have. Let's stop taking pictures in front of airplanes and buildings and showing what we have. And let's have pictures and music like of the one that was, we are the world. We are the children. We are the ones who make life a better place to live in. Let's do that. And for Jonathan Granoff and myself, let's make a great 2024. We can. And let's celebrate in 2025 the miracle of life. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you at the next episode of A Time for Truth show.
Show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got. But the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet